While Americans argued over gas prices and fentanyl, something far more dangerous was brewing quietly in diplomatic back rooms. On March 4, 2025, the U.S. slapped a 17% tariff on Mexican tomatoes. By March 6, Mexico was in talks with China and Russia about a potential BRICS membership. Coincidence? Think again. Mexico isn't just retaliating. They're rewriting the economic map, positioning themselves as the new bridge between Latin America and the global South. This isn't just about trade. It's about who controls the future of the Western Hemisphere, and America may be too late to stop it. On February 1, 2025, Donald Trump did what Donald Trump does best. He detonated a political bombshell. From the Oval Office, in a speech laced with nationalistic fire, he declared a 25% tariff on all Mexican imports. The justification: A, crackdown on fentanyl smuggling and illegal immigration. But critics, economists, and foreign diplomats alike saw it for what it truly was: a calculated political maneuver to revive his America First agenda and re-energize his voter base. To Trump supporters, it was a bold stroke. He's standing up to chaos, they cheered. To others, it was the first punch in a trade war that could upend the very fabric of North American commerce. But this was no ordinary tariff. The United States and Mexico are economically welded together. In 2024 alone, over $475 billion in goods flowed from Mexico into the U.S.: cars, avocados, machinery. Tomatoes, the border buzzes with commerce. And now, every product crossing that line would cost a quarter more. The move stunned business leaders and farmers alike. Supply chains began to tremble. From Detroit to Dallas, CEOs scrambled emergency meetings. At the port of Laredo, shipments slowed as importers reevaluated their margins. But none were hit harder or sooner than the American consumer. Prices inched up. Bacon, avocados, even the humble taco became collateral damage. Meanwhile, Trump framed it as a national security issue. We are being flooded with drugs and criminals, he told the press. Mexico has failed to act. So now we act. But beneath the surface, analysts saw a deeper game. This tariff wasn't just about drugs or borders. It was about power. About Trump's quest to assert dominance in a global order he sees as unfair. And it was a message not just to Mexico, but to the world: America will no longer play nice. Behind closed doors, White House insiders revealed a different strategy. According to leaked memos, Trump's advisors had been exploring this move since December. The timing, just months ahead of the presidential primaries, was no accident. It was a rallying cry to rural America: farmers, truckers, factory workers, those who felt left behind by globalization. But here's the twist: the very communities Trump claimed to protect would soon face the blowback. Iowa pig farmers, who rely heavily on Mexican buyers, began to panic. "This could wipe us out," said one producer. "We're already on razor-thin margins." Poultry producers in Georgia echoed the fear. "We can't lose this market," they warned. And in Washington, Congress was split. Some hailed Trump's toughness. Others feared a boomerang effect. "You don't punch your neighbor in the face and expect to have dinner together tomorrow," said a senior Democrat. Still, Trump stood firm. And just 3 days later, he threatened more: a 17% tariff on Mexican tomatoes. The message was clear: comply or pay. But Mexico wasn't going to be intimidated. And what happened next would turn this trade skirmish into a geopolitical earthquake. President Claudia Sheinbaum didn't blink. Just days after Trump's tariffs took effect, she stepped to the podium in Mexico City and delivered a calm, steely response: retaliatory tariffs on U.S. pork and poultry, effective immediately. To the untrained eye, this might seem like tit-for-tat politics. But for those watching closely, it was surgical economic warfare. Mexico targeted the beating heart of Trump's rural support base: farmers in states like Iowa, Nebraska, and Arkansas. The message: you mess with us, we'll make your voters pay. the numbers were staggering. In 2023, the U.S. exported $2 billion worth of meat to Mexico. Overnight, that market became uncertain. American producers, many already under financial strain, faced plummeting demand, rising storage costs, and a looming glut in domestic supply. Supermarkets in Guadalajara and Monterrey started promoting local chicken and Brazilian pork as alternatives. American products, once dominant, began to vanish from shelves. At a rally in Oaxaca, Sheinbaum made it clear Mexico will not be bullied. "We are not a colony. We are a sovereign nation, and we will defend our people and our economy." Her approval ratings soared. National pride swelled. Hashtags like Soberanía Económica trended across Latin America. And in the U.S., panic. Barbecue restaurants raised prices. School cafeterias reconsidered lunch menus, and farmers began calling their congressmen demanding answers. Trump, as expected, doubled down. But Mexico had flipped the script from victim to avenger, and the world was paying attention. As tariffs flew across borders, Mexico made its boldest move yet, courting the BRICS alliance: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Behind closed doors, Sheinbaum's diplomats began exploratory talks with Beijing and Moscow. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Mexico no longer saw the U.S. as its only dance partner. For Washington, this was a red flag. If Mexico joined BRICS, it would mean the second-largest Latin American economy aligning with America's greatest geopolitical rivals. It could create a pan-Eurasian Latin trading bloc, sidelining U.S. influence across two continents. In 2024, Mexico's trade with BRICS nations hit $150 billion, a 12% increase. Energy deals with Russia, semiconductor talks with India, and agricultural partnerships with Brazil accelerated. Analysts called it Mexico's quiet revolution. In Washington, alarms rang. Intelligence reports described growing Chinese presence in Mexican ports. Diplomats whispered of a BRICS pipeline through Central America. And Trump, he exploded. On the Truth Social, he posted, "Mexico's president is betraying us. If she wants China and Russia, fine, but they better not expect American dollars." He then threatened a 30% tariff on all Mexican goods, including cars, a move that would cripple both economies. But Sheinbaum didn't flinch. In a speech to Mexico's Congress, she said, "This is not about choosing enemies, it's about choosing independence." With that, the global trade map began to tilt, and a new axis of power emerged. As politicians clashed and alliances shifted, the real victims emerged: ordinary people. In the U.S., grocery bills spiked. A family in Ohio reported paying 18% more for pork and 22% more for chicken. Barbecue joints added tariff surcharges to menus. Food banks saw increased demand as prices outpaced wages. In Mexico, farmers were in crisis. Trump's 17% tariff on tomatoes hit hard. Entire crops in Sinaloa and Michoacán were left to rot. "We're being punished for decisions made in Washington," one farmer lamented. Auto manufacturers panicked. U.S. companies relying on $80 billion in Mexican parts began laying off workers. A single 30% tariff, they warned, could collapse entire supply chains. Even Canada watched nervously. As the third USMCA partner, it stood between two sparring giants, fearing a ripple effect that could drag its economy into recession. Meanwhile, everyday consumers asked the question no one in power seemed to answer: why are we the ones paying for their war? By mid-2025, the U.S.-Mexico trade war had become more than an economic dispute. It was a test of dominance in the Western Hemisphere. Trump's America. First rhetoric was back in full swing. His supporters cheered each escalation, but economists warned of a looming disaster. By August, projections showed U.S. GDP could shrink by 1.2% if the tariffs held. Mexico, once dependent on the U.S., was rising with a new identity: assertive, strategic, global. Claudia Sheinbaum's defiance had redefined the country's posture. And as whispers of BRICS membership grew louder, so did her international credibility. The USMCA, once a symbol of trilateral cooperation, was unraveling, and the world watched. Europe, China, and Brazil moved in on markets left behind. The vacuum left by U.S. retreat was quickly filled by eager players. The real question: can these two nations find their way back, or is this the new normal? In the final moments of her August address, Sheinbaum delivered a chilling line. If the United States wants war, we will give them war, but we prefer peace. The question is, does Washington? The answer still unclear, but one thing was certain: North America would never be the same. In every headline, every tariff, and every press conference, the 2025 U.S.-Mexico trade war reveals a deeper truth about global power and how easily it can shift. This is not just about pork, tomatoes, or cars. It is a masterclass in economic leverage, political ego, and what happens when two neighboring giants refuse to back down. At its core, this conflict was sparked by a single decision: Donald Trump's 25% tariff on Mexican imports, justified by the fight against fentanyl and illegal immigration. But beneath that explanation was a strategy aimed at reclaiming political momentum and reigniting nationalist pride. What followed was a textbook case of economic retaliation. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum responded with precision. By targeting pork and poultry, two of the United States' most valuable agricultural exports, Mexico delivered a blow that directly affected Trump's rural voter base. This was not random. It was calculated, deliberate, and deeply symbolic. The first lesson is about economic interdependence. The United States and Mexico are not just neighbors. Their economies are intertwined. Every tariff that Trump imposed did not only hit Mexico, it bounced back. Prices rose in American supermarkets. Farmers lost revenue. Manufacturers felt the squeeze. The modern economy does not respect borders, and punishing one partner often punishes both. The second lesson is about national pride versus practical diplomacy. Trump's America First agenda played well politically. It gave his supporters a sense of control, a belief that their country was standing tall. But it ignored the quiet, long-term relationships that sustain global trade. In contrast, Sheinbaum positioned herself as the protector of Mexican sovereignty. Her actions were not only retaliatory, they were framed as acts of dignity and resistance. And for many Mexicans, that narrative worked. But there is a third, more unsettling lesson: when diplomacy breaks down, alliances break apart. As the United States escalated, Mexico looked elsewhere. Talks with BRICS nations, China, Russia, India, Brazil, began to accelerate. These were not just economic conversations, they were signals. Mexico was saying, "We have options." That shift terrified Washington, not because it feared trade with Russia or Brazil, but because it realized its grip on the Western Hemisphere was no longer guaranteed. In this new landscape, loyalty is earned, not assumed. We also learn that the real losers in these battles are not always the leaders, but the people. Farmers on both sides suffered. Consumers paid more. Small businesses adapted or folded. And yet neither Trump nor Sheinbaum showed signs of compromise. The war became a spectacle of speeches, hashtags, and threats, while millions quietly endured the consequences. This brings us to a fourth lesson. Ego is expensive. Trade wars may be launched with patriotic language, but they are fueled by stubbornness. They last longer than planned. They escalate faster than expected. And they cost more than anyone admits. But perhaps the most important lesson is about the future. The trade war of 2025 was not just a policy conflict. It was a preview, a warning. As the world fragments into new blocs, Western democracies, Eastern alliances, and rising Southern economies, the balance of power is shifting. No nation, not even the United States, can afford to act like an island. Collaboration, respect, and strategy matter more than muscle. So what should we take from this? First, we must recognize how interconnected our world is. A tariff in Washington affects a tomato grower in Sinaloa and a chef in Chicago. Second, we must question the stories we are told. Not every economic decision is about safety or justice. Sometimes it is about politics. Sometimes it is about ego. Third, we must remember that trade is not just numbers on a screen. It is jobs, meals, families, futures. And finally, we must ask better questions. Are our leaders making decisions for us or for themselves? Are we strengthening our communities or weakening our neighbors? Are we preparing for peace or provoking new wars? The 2025 U.S.-Mexico trade war may one day end. Tariffs may lift. Deals may return. But the lessons it leaves behind should not be forgotten. Because in a world where food prices rise faster than wages and alliances can shift overnight, understanding how power works is not just for politicians, it is for all of us. What often goes unnoticed in dramatic economic clashes like the 2025 U.S.-Mexico trade war is the silent education they provide, the real-world lesson plans unfolding in real time. It is not just politicians and corporations who are tested. Every citizen, every worker, every small business owner is forced to learn quickly or get left behind. Lesson 1. Supply chains are the real front lines. In a globalized world, supply chains are not just logistics, they are lifelines. A single tariff on Mexican auto parts, for example, does not only affect factories in Tijuana, it cascades through assembly plants in Texas, warehouses in Ohio, and dealerships in Alberta. Suddenly, a single political decision transforms into layoffs, shortages, and higher prices. The war in 2025 revealed how fragile these connections truly are. Companies that depended on just-in-time shipping found themselves with empty shelves. Consumers found themselves waiting weeks for basic products. The most adaptive businesses were not the biggest but the fastest. They pivoted, diversified suppliers, and treated resilience as a competitive advantage. Lesson 2. Political language can obscure economic reality. Throughout the crisis, Trump framed his actions as defending American workers. Sheinbaum, meanwhile, defended Mexico's sovereignty. Both messages played well on television, but neither fully explained what was at stake. Tariffs were presented as punishments when in fact they are taxes paid not by the foreign country, but by domestic businesses and consumers. This fact was often lost in the fog of patriotism and propaganda. In moments like these, clarity is power. Citizens must learn to decode political theater and understand the economic mechanics underneath. When tariffs are announced, ask who really pays, who really benefits, what is the long-term cost. Lesson 3. Economic pain can spark geopolitical change. One of the most profound consequences of this trade war was Mexico's pivot toward BRICS. In a world increasingly divided into economic blocs, being pushed away by one superpower often means being pulled toward another. What began as a response to tariffs quickly evolved into a realignment of alliances. Mexico opened deeper talks with China and Russia, seeking new markets and protection. Latin American nations watched closely. If Mexico could resist U.S. pressure and thrive, why not them? This shift holds a powerful message. Economic bullying rarely builds loyalty. It breeds resistance. And when allies begin to explore other options, the world gets more fragmented and more unpredictable. Lesson 4. Nationalism has limits in a global market. Trump's America First message carried emotional weight. It promised protection in a world that felt chaotic. But the war with Mexico exposed its limitations. You cannot wall off trade. You cannot sanction your way to prosperity. And you cannot maintain dominance while undermining trust. Sheinbaum, for her part, showed how smaller nations can leverage dignity and strategy to push back. Her strength was not in economic size, but in resolve. She turned a defensive position into a platform and reshaped Mexico's global image in the process. Lesson 5. Adaptation beats aggression. In the end, the survivors of this conflict were not the loudest, but the most adaptable. Businesses that had backup suppliers in Asia. Families that learned to stretch grocery budgets. Governments that explored new partnerships. Adaptation is not just a business strategy, it is a national necessity.